The first sound was laughter. Cold, jagged, and wrong. Then came the echo of the gun. Clara Bennett didn't look back. She couldn't. The wind tore across the Yellowstone flats, dragging the scent of dust and gunpowder as she stumbled down the slope. One hand pressed against her shoulder where the bullet had torn through flesh. Each step sent fire through her arm, but she kept running, her boots slipping on the loose shale. Behind her, Travis Cole's voice carried through the canyon, mocking, cruel, certain she wouldn't make it far. She didn't know how long she'd been running. Maybe minutes. Maybe forever. The world had narrowed to pain and the pounding in her chest. The river shimmered ahead in the dying light, a ribbon of gold and shadow twisting through the trees. If she could reach it, maybe the current could hide her scent, drown the trail of blood she was leaving behind. But when she reached the bank, her knees buckled. She fell hard, tasting mud, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. For a moment, the world tilted. The earth, the sky, the sound of the river. Her vision blurred, the sunset bleeding across her eyes. "Don't you die here," she whispered to herself. Her fingers dug into the dirt. She had promised herself long ago that men like Travis Cole would never own her again. Far upriver, a figure on horseback paused against the horizon. Eli Turner, 55, gray-bearded and silent as the mountains themselves. Once a scout for the Union Army, now a ghost among the ridges, he'd long since given up on the idea of peace. He rode not for company or comfort, but because motion felt safer than memory. Yet that evening, something made him stop. A trail of blood by the reeds, boot prints, uneven and frantic. A woman's torn shawl snagged on a branch. Eli dismounted slowly, eyes narrowing. He'd seen too many scenes like this. Pursuit, violence, the same old story played out across the frontier. He followed the trail downstream until he found her, half hidden among the cottonwoods. Her face was pale beneath the grime, lips trembling. But her eyes, those fierce brown eyes, were still open. "Easy now," he said quietly, crouching beside her. She flinched, reaching for a small knife at her belt, but her hand fell limp before she could draw it. Eli lifted his canteen to her lips, letting a trickle of water slide down. She coughed, swallowed, then stared up at him like she wasn't sure if he was real. "Who are you?" she managed, voice barely a whisper. "Someone who's not going to hurt you," Eli replied. He glanced at the wound, high on the shoulder, bleeding but not fatal if treated soon. He tore a strip from his sleeve and poured whiskey from a small flask onto it. The moment the liquid hit the wound, Clara gasped in pain, biting back a cry. "Sorry," Eli muttered. "Ain't much choice." He worked quickly, wrapping the cloth tight. His movements were practiced, steady. The kind of steadiness born from a lifetime of patching up men who didn't live long enough to thank him. As he worked, his mind wandered to the past. A flash of a small girl, coughing in a cabin somewhere far away. His daughter, feverish, begging, and him, too proud, too afraid, walking out because the doctor said there was nothing to be done. That memory never left him. Maybe that's why he couldn't walk away now. By the time he finished binding her wound, night had fallen fully. The canyon filled with the hum of insects and the distant cry of coyotes. He looked at her again, exhausted, shivering, but alive. "You can't stay here," he said. "There's a shack up the canyon. You can rest there." Clara tried to protest. "He'll come back." Eli's voice was calm, but something in it carried steel. "Let him." He lifted her carefully, slinging her good arm over his shoulder, and half carried her toward his horse. She was light, too light, and the effort cost him, but he didn't stop. The snow had started to fall, thin white flakes catching the moonlight. As they rode through the narrow gorge, Clara stirred weakly, her head resting against his chest. Why help me?" she asked. Eli hesitated. "Because last time I didn't, someone died." That seemed to quiet her. The wind grew sharper, the sound of the river fading behind them. By the time they reached the old line shack, a one-room shelter of timber and stone half buried into the hillside. The snow was thick enough to muffle their steps. Eli pushed open the door, the hinges groaning. Inside, a cold hearth and the faint smell of pine. He set her down on the cot, lit a lamp, and went to work building a fire. The light flickered against the walls, painting the room in amber. Clara watched him from the cot, her face half in shadow. She didn't trust him, not yet. But there was something different about this man. He moved like someone used to silence, to pain, to regret. When the fire finally caught, Eli sat across from her, cleaning his rifle. "Who's the man chasing you?" he asked quietly. She swallowed hard. "Travis Cole, ferry owner down in Paradise Valley?" Eli's hands paused. The name meant something to him. A memory of a gunfight, a body on a muddy bank, and the sneer of a younger man who thought cruelty was power. "You sure?" Clara nodded weakly. "He thought he could buy me. When I said no, he tried to take me instead." Her eyes flickered with anger. "He'll come for me again." Eli looked into the fire, jaw tightening. "Then we'll be ready." Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, two strangers, one running from violence, one from guilt, shared the same firelight. Neither trusted fate, but both knew the river had carried them here for a reason. And far down the canyon, beneath the whisper of the falling snow, another sound stirred, the faint crunch of boots and the slow creak of a saddle. Travis Cole wasn't finished yet. By dawn, the world had vanished beneath white. Snow came thick and relentless, swallowing the valley, softening the outlines of everything that had once seemed solid. The shack groaned under its weight, wind clawing at the shutters like a hungry beast. Inside, the fire burned low, casting weak orange light across the rough-hewn walls. Eli Turner sat near the hearth, boots off, sharpening his knife in slow, steady strokes. Every few minutes, he'd glance toward the cot in the corner, toward Clara Bennett, who slept fitfully under a blanket patched with old army wool. Her wound had clotted during the night, but fever had taken hold, and she tossed in uneasy dreams, muttering fragments of words that made no sense. "Don't, please don't," she whispered once, voice trembling. Eli looked away, jaw tightening. He'd heard that tone before. On battlefields, in burned-out homes, in women's voices when the cavalry came too late. He poured a measure of water into a tin cup, stirred in the last of his willow bark, and waited until it cooled. When she stirred again, he rose and crossed to her side. "Drink this." Clara blinked up at him, dazed, her face pale beneath the fever's flush. She hesitated before taking the cup, fingers brushing his. "What is it?" "Something that tastes worse than dying," he said dryly. "But it'll bring your fever down." She managed a faint, cracked laugh. The first sound of life he'd heard from her that wasn't pain. Then she drank, wincing at the bitterness, and handed the cup back. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the hiss of snow against the roof and the snap of the fire. After a time, Clara's gaze drifted to the walls, to the maps, the tools, the long-neglected rifle above the door. "You live here alone?" Eli shook his head. "Don't live anywhere. Shack belongs to a friend who doesn't need it anymore." "What happened to him?" "War happened. Like it did to most men who thought they'd survive it." She studied him for a moment. The lines around his eyes, the faded scar that ran from his ear to his collar. "You were a soldier?" "Scout," he corrected. "Back when the country was still deciding what kind of hell it wanted to be." Silence settled again, heavy and full. Outside, the wind howled against the door, making it rattle on its hinges. "You got family somewhere?" he asked at last. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Had. My husband died last spring. Fever took him. We had a small claim west of town. After he passed, folks started looking at me different. Travis Cole most of all." Eli didn't interrupt. He said I owed him for the ferry, for the supplies. When I told him I'd pay in cash after the harvest, he laughed. Said a woman like me had better ways to settle a debt. She looked into the fire, voice hardening. So I ran. Eli nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. He'd seen what men like Travis did. Power twisted into cruelty, hidden behind a smile and a clean shirt. "You'll need to rest another day before we move," he said finally. "Storm's not letting up anyway." "And after?" He hesitated. "After, we find a way to make him stop." Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp despite the fever. "You mean kill him?" Eli's knife paused in his hand. The edge caught the firelight, gleaming. "If it comes to that," the wind outside rose again, a long, mournful sound like the cry of something ancient. Clara shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. She wanted to ask why he was helping her, what debt he thought she could pay. But the words wouldn't come. There was something in his eyes that told her not to push. By evening, the storm had grown into a white wall that erased the world beyond the door. The two of them sat close to the fire, sharing the last of Eli's jerky and coffee boiled black. Clara's fever had begun to fade, though she still trembled now and then. "You ever get tired of it?" she asked softly. "The quiet?" Eli gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's the trouble. Quiet's when the ghosts get loud." He didn't mean to say it. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Clara looked at him, waiting. And because the night was long and the storm was endless, he found himself speaking again. "There was a girl," he said. "My daughter. Lived with her mother back in Missouri. When I came home after the war, the fever had already taken her. I wasn't there. Never even got to bury her." The fire cracked between them. Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." Eli nodded, eyes distant. "Been trying to make peace with that ever since. Don't figure a man ever does." For a while, they sat without speaking, the storm pounding against the world outside. Then Clara reached out, hesitated, and laid her hand lightly over his. Her touch was small, trembling, not out of affection, but something closer to understanding. "You were there when I needed someone," she said quietly. "Maybe that's enough peace for now." He didn't pull away, didn't speak. Just sat there as the fire burned low, the storm's rage muffled beyond the walls. Later, when Clara finally slept, Eli rose and checked the rifle by the door. The snow had sealed the world tight, but he knew men like Travis. Storms didn't stop them. They only hid them better. He stepped outside for a moment, breath freezing in the air. The blizzard swallowed the landscape, turning it into a vast, white void. Somewhere in the darkness, he thought he saw movement. A flicker of lantern light far down the valley, quickly snuffed out. When he went back inside, He bolted the door and sat by the fire until dawn, knife in hand, listening to the wind whisper Travis Cole's name through the snow. Morning came slow and gray, the world outside still buried in white. The storm had broken sometime before dawn, leaving a silence so deep it pressed against the ears. Eli Turner stepped out into it, the cold biting at his skin, breath rising like smoke. For the first time in days, he could see the valley again. The river, a dark thread winding through snowdrifts. The cottonwoods bowed under frost. But what caught his eye wasn't the beauty of the land. It was a mark. Near the stream, half covered by drift, a single boot print stamped to the snow. Broad heel, uneven tread. Eli's pulse slowed to a hard, steady rhythm. He knew that mark, Travis Cole, had worn it when he worked the ferry crossing years ago. He'd limped then, after a brawl that shattered his ankle. That limp had never gone away. Eli crouched low, brushing away the snow to reveal more prints. They led from the river toward the shack, then turned back again. Whoever it was had come close enough to see the smoke, maybe even the shadows through the window. Close enough to know they were still alive. He stood there for a long moment, jaw tight, then turned back inside. Clara sat near the fire, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, color returning to her cheeks. She looked up as he entered. Something wrong? Eli shut the door and leaned his rifle against the wall. Someone was here last night. Tracks down by the creek. Her face paled. Him? Could be, don't know for sure. But he did know. Deep down, where instinct lived and reason had no say, he knew it was Travis. Clara drew the blanket tighter. Then he's hunting me. He's hunting both of us now. For a while, neither spoke. The wind outside had softened, whispering through the pines like a secret. Clara's fingers trembled as she reached for the coffee pot. I thought I was done running, she said. Guess I was wrong. Eli watched her hands shake, watched the shadow of fear move through her eyes, not weakness, but memory. You said he worked you near the ferry? She nodded. After my husband died, I took a job cleaning cabins and keeping the books. He said he'd pay fair. For a while, he did. But then he started. She stopped, eyes drifting to the floor. He wanted what wasn't his. When I refused, he said no one would believe a widow over him. He's the kind of man who thinks the law's just another way to keep women quiet. Eli said nothing. His hand brushed unconsciously against the scar under his collar, the one from the war, the one that never stopped aching when he thought about his own daughter. What was her name? Clara asked softly. He looked up, surprised. The girl you told me about, she continued. The one you lost. Sarah, he said finally. The name caught in his throat. She was 7. Liked to chase the chickens and steal my tobacco when her ma wasn't looking. She was the best part of me. Clara's eyes filled with something like grief, not just for him, but for the echo of her own loss in his words. What happened? Eli stared into the fire. I got a letter while I was still scouting for the army. Fever took the town. By the time I rode back, it was over. I buried her under a cottonwood that same night. Couldn't even find a preacher. He paused, voice rough. Travis Cole was in that town back then. He ran freight for the army, cheated settlers, sold sickness for profit. Some folks whispered he brought the fever himself, poisoning the wells for the money. I never proved it, but I saw him walk away rich while others buried their dead. Clara's breath caught. Then it's him, the same man. Eli nodded slowly. The truth hung between them, ugly, undeniable. Travis Cole had destroyed both their lives, just in different ways. The fire crackled. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Eli rose, grabbed his coat, and reached for the rifle by the door. "What are you doing?" Clara asked. "Going after him." "You can't. You'll freeze or worse." He looked back at her, a flicker of something fierce in his eyes. "You said you were done running. So am I." Clara stood too, her face pale but steady. "Then I'm coming with you." Eli shook his head. "You can barely walk. I won't stay here waiting for him to find me." Her tone left no room for argument. Beneath the fear, there was a core of defiance, the same spark he'd seen in Sarah when she'd challenged him to races in the field. He felt something twist in his chest. "All right," he said quietly, "but we do this my way." They packed what little they had: dried meat, a canteen, the rifle, Eli's old revolver, a lantern half filled with oil. By noon, the sun had risen high enough to turn the snow into blinding glass. The world glittered cruelly bright. They followed the tracks along the frozen river, moving slow. Eli walked ahead, rifle at the ready, scanning the tree line. Clara kept close behind, her breath coming in short bursts, but she didn't complain. After an hour, they came to a fallen tree near the river bend. The track stopped there, and something else began. Boot prints scattered in every direction, as if someone had stood there a long time. In the snow beneath the trunk, a small scrap of cloth fluttered in the wind, torn, dark with dried blood. Eli knelt, fingers brushing the fabric. He turned it over. "From your coat," he murmured. Clara looked down, eyes widening. "Then he was here, watching us?" Eli rose, scanning the ridge. "Not anymore. He's moving north toward the ferry crossing." Her breath clouded the air. "You're sure?" He nodded. "That's where he always runs when things turn bad. He's got friends there. Men who'll hide him if they can." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Then what are we waiting for?" Eli met her gaze, the years of silence and guilt in his eyes hardening into resolve. "For the first time in a long while," he said, "we're not running away. We're running toward something." As the light began to fade, they turned toward the distant river bend where the ferry crossing waited. A place of water and ghosts, of old debts long unpaid. The shadows lengthened behind them, stretching across the snow like the past refusing to let go. And in that cold silence, the promise of reckoning took root. By mid-morning, the sky had turned the color of tarnished steel. The wind moved low across the valley, sharp and mean, rattling the bare cottonwoods like dry bones. Eli Turner rode in silence, the reins stiff in his hands, his breath clouding in the cold. Behind him, Clara Bennett clung to the saddle horn, her body tense, eyes fixed on the trail that wound down toward the Yellowstone crossing. Neither spoke. Words had no place in what waited ahead. The ferry landing appeared at last, a stretch of frozen bank, the old dock half buried in snow, the ferry itself tied loosely to a post on the far side. Smoke rose from the shack near the waterline, thin and gray. Eli slowed the horse, his eyes narrowing. There, standing in front of the shack with a rifle slung across his chest, was Travis Cole. He looked exactly as Eli remembered, broad-shouldered, cruel-mouthed, the kind of man who laughed when others bled. His beard was shot with gray now, his limp more pronounced. But the arrogance hadn't faded. When he saw Eli dismount, a grin spread across his weathered face. "Well, I'll be damned," Travis called. "Didn't think you had it in you to come down here, old man." Eli's boots sank into the snow as he stepped forward. "You're under arrest," he said flatly. "Marshal in Livingston wants you for murder and fraud. You're coming with me." Travis chuckled, shaking his head. "Still playing lawman, huh? Thought you gave that up after your little girl died. What was her name again? Sarah?" Eli's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Travis's grin widened. Heard she went quick. Fever, wasn't it? Bet that burned worse than any bullet. The words hit harder than a punch. Eli's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the old rage that had slept too long. He steadied himself, voice low and steady. Don't. Travis took a step closer, boots crunching on the ice. Don't what? Remind you of how weak you were? You let her die, Eli, just like you'll let this woman die too. From the ridge behind them, Clara's voice rang out. He's not the one who kills Travis. That's you. Travis spun around, surprise flashing across his face. Clara stood at the edge of the trees, pale but steady, a revolver gripped in both hands. Eli's heart lurched. Clara, but she didn't move. Her voice was cold as the river. You thought you owned me. But not today, Travis sneered. You think you can shoot me, girl? You couldn't even shoot straight when Eli fired. The shot cracked through the air, splitting Travis's words in half. Snow erupted near his boots. Next one won't miss, Eli said. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then Travis laughed, a low, bitter sound. You always were soft, Eli. You don't have the guts. He swung his rifle up, finger brushing the trigger. Eli dove sideways, the bullet splintering the post behind him. He rolled, came up firing. His first shot tore through Travis's coat. The second sent the rifle spinning from his hands. Travis staggered, clutching his arm, blood dark against the snow. You think this changes anything? He snarled. The law won't care what you've done here. Eli advanced slowly, revolver steady. Maybe not. But at least the dying stops with you. But before he could move closer, Clara stepped forward. Her hands no longer shook. The revolver pointed squarely at Travis's chest. He doesn't have to do this, she said. But I might. Travis looked between them. The old man with his steady eyes, the woman he'd tried to break and failed. Something inside him faltered, a crack in the arrogance that had kept him alive this long. Still, he smirked, voice dripping venom. You'll regret this. Both of you. Eli holstered his weapon. Maybe, but not as much as you'll regret living another day free. He lunged, tackling Travis into the snow. They hit hard, the air bursting from both their lungs. The fight was savage, close, desperate. Years of hatred poured into every blow. Travis swung wild, fists thick as hammers. But Eli moved with a soldier's rhythm, every strike measured, controlled. Where's your laugh now? Eli grunted, pinning him down. Travis spat in his face. Eli didn't flinch. He pressed his forearm against Travis's throat until the man wheezed, then pulled a length of rope from his coat and bound his wrists tight. When it was over, Eli stood, chest heaving, snow melting on his skin. He looked down at Travis, beaten, breathing hard, eyes still full of hate. Not this time, Eli said quietly. You don't get to win by dying easy. Clara came to his side, her revolver still trembling slightly. For the first time, she looked at Travis without fear, only pity. You'll answer for everything, she said softly. Travis laughed weakly, coughing blood. You think the marshal cares? You're nothing. Both of you. Maybe. Eli replied, his voice calm now. But we'll walk away with something you'll never have. Travis frowned. What's that? Eli met his eyes. Peace. They dragged him to the shack near the ferry, tied him to the post, and waited. Clara cleaned the blood from Eli's knuckles in silence. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the river breaking through the ice. A low, rumbling song of thaw and change. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, Eli built a fire. The flames reflected in Clara's eyes as she watched him. You could have killed him, she said. I wanted to, Eli admitted. But it wouldn't bring Sarah back, wouldn't make the world any cleaner. She looked down at the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. I would have shot him. Eli nodded slowly. Maybe you should have. Maybe you still can. Clara shook her head. No, you're right. Some fights you win by stopping. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Not just strength, not just survival, but grace. They sat together in silence as the night grew deeper, the orange glow painting their faces in soft light. Far off, a horse whinnied, followed by the faint jingle of spurs. Eli stood, hand resting on his gun. Through the drifting snow, a figure appeared. A man on horseback, coat long and dark, badge glinting in the firelight. The marshal from Livingston had arrived. Eli stepped forward to meet him. The long road of vengeance finally ending not with death, but with justice. The marshal dismounted without a word, boots sinking deep into the snow. He was a tall man with a grizzled mustache and a calm, unreadable face. Someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. The silver badge on his chest caught the faint glow of the fire as he looked from Eli Turner to the man tied to the post. Travis Cole slumped forward, his breath ragged, blood crusted along his jaw. On Marshal Harlan Briggs, the man said quietly. Got a message from a drifter up north, said there was trouble by the ferry. His eyes shifted to Travis. Guess he wasn't lying. Eli nodded. He's wanted for more than one crime. Fraud, assault, maybe worse. There's a woman up in Gardner says he murdered her brother. Briggs crouched, tilting Travis's chin up with a gloved hand. That true? Travis smirked through split lips. You gonna take his word, Marshal? He's half mad. You know what they say about ghosts. Talk long enough to him, and you start seeing things. Briggs studied him a long moment before standing. You can argue your case in Livingston. I'm not here to listen to your mouth. He turned to Eli. You want to sign the statement? Eli hesitated, glancing at Clara. She stood near the fire, her face drawn and pale but steady, the revolver still holstered at her side. He saw the question in her eyes. Is it over? Yeah, Eli said finally. I'll sign. The marshal motioned toward his horse. We'll leave by dawn. You can bring the statement then. He'll be in irons till we reach the jailhouse. Briggs took a set of handcuffs from his saddlebag and fastened them around Travis's wrists, replacing Eli's rope. The sound of the metal clicking shut echoed across the river like a verdict. When the marshal led Travis away, the night swallowed them both, leaving only the whisper of snow against the riverbank. The wind had calmed, and the stars hung low and sharp, their reflection trembling on the frozen water. Clara let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It's strange, she murmured. After everything, it doesn't feel like victory. Eli watched the place where the men had disappeared. It's not, he said quietly. It's just done. They saddled the horses in silence and rode back to the shack. The snow crunched under the hooves, steady and rhythmic. The air carried a thin smell of pine and smoke. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled once before the world went still again. Inside, the cabin felt different now. Emptier, somehow quieter than before. Clara settled by the hearth, holding her hands out to the warmth. Eli poured 2 cups of coffee, the sound of liquid against tin the only noise between them. When he handed her a cup, she looked up at him. You ever think it's possible to forget? He sat down opposite her. No, but sometimes you learn how to remember without it hurting so bad. She stared into the fire. I thought I'd feel free. But now that he's gone, I just feel tired. Eli nodded slowly. That's the first step toward peace. The wind sighed through the gaps in the wall, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth. It wasn't much, but it was something. A promise that spring wasn't far away. Later that night, Clara slept by the fire, her breathing soft and even. Eli sat awake, whittling at a piece of pine with his pocket knife. The rhythm of the blade against the wood soothed him, though his thoughts wandered far. He thought of Sarah, her laugh, her bright eyes, the way she used to hum when she helped him mend tack in the yard. He'd carried her ghost through every mile of this cold, broken land. But tonight, for the first time, the memory didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a whisper, a presence, quiet and forgiving. He looked at Clara, asleep and safe, and realized he wasn't alone in his penance. They were both survivors of someone else's cruelty, both walking a line between past and possibility. When morning came, the world was wrapped in fog. Eli stepped outside, breath catching at the sight of the river, no longer frozen solid but moving, slow and steady. Dark water pushing beneath the thinning ice. The first sign of change. Clara joined him on the porch, wrapped in his old coat. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He nodded. "River's waking up." They stood there for a while, listening to the current, saying nothing. For all the blood and noise that had filled the last days, silence was what felt most sacred now. When the sun broke through the mist, Eli turned to her. "You got family anywhere?" She shook her head. "Not anymore. Maybe somewhere south. Haven't decided yet. You could stay a while," he said after a pause. "Cabin needs fixing. Firewood won't split itself." A faint smile touched her lips. "You offering work or company?" Eli looked out toward the river. "Guess I don't know the difference anymore." Clara laughed softly. Just a breath of sound, but it eased something tight in his chest. For the first time in years, he let himself smile too. As the day stretched long, they worked together outside, clearing snow from the roof and gathering firewood. Every small task felt heavier than it should, but it was the kind of heaviness that built a meaning rather than breaking it. By dusk, the shack glowed from within, firelight flickering through the cracks. Clara hummed while washing tin plates, and Eli caught himself pausing to listen. It reminded him of Sarah's tune again, simple, wordless, alive. When she noticed his stare, she said quietly, "Don't look at me like that, Eli. I ain't something you need to fix." He shook his head. "Didn't mean to, just haven't heard anyone hum in a long while." Clara smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you did." Outside, the night deepened, and snow began to fall again. Soft, harmless, cleansing. Inside, two souls who had walked through hell found themselves breathing in rhythm. The silence between them no longer a void, but a kind of peace. For Eli, it wasn't absolution, not yet. But it was enough to start believing in it. And for Clara, it was the first night she slept without dreaming of a man's laughter echoing down a riverbank. The days after the marshal's departure passed in a strange, suspended calm. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of frozen mud and brittle grass beneath. The river, no longer silent, murmured its way through the valley, a low, steady voice that spoke of thaw and beginning again. Eli Turner woke before dawn each morning, listening to the sounds of life creeping back into the land, the creak of ice splitting, the distant call of geese flying north, the steady crackle of the fire Clara kept alive through the night. The world was changing, and for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what that meant. He'd taken to carving again, a habit he thought he'd buried long ago with his wife and child. There was a small box of tools left in the corner of the shack when he and Clara had arrived, forgotten by whoever once lived there. He took a piece of pine from the woodpile and began shaping it with careful, patient strokes. Each morning, while Clara mended torn clothes or fetched water from the river, he sat on the porch and worked the blade through the grain, letting the smell of pine sap and smoke mix in the cold air. "What's it going to be?" she asked one morning, her breath fogging the air. Eli smiled faintly without looking up. "Don't know yet. Guess I'll see what's inside." She laughed softly. "Sounds like you're talking about more than wood." He met her eyes then. Blue meeting brown, the past meeting what was left of the future. And for a moment, he couldn't tell if he wanted to smile or fall apart. "Maybe I am." By the end of that week, a bird began to take shape. Its wings spread as if ready to lift from his palm. He sanded it smooth, then rubbed ash and oil into the surface until it gleamed a soft gray. It was rough and imperfect, but alive in a way that only something made by human hands could be. Clara turned it over in her hands, tracing the delicate curves. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Eli shrugged. "Just a thing to keep my hands busy." "No," she said quietly, shaking her head. "It's more than that. You made it fly." He didn't know how to answer that. He just watched her hold the carving against the light, the way the morning sun caught her hair, and felt a warmth that surprised him. Gentle, almost frightening in its simplicity, they stayed on the ranch through the thaw. The river rose with the melting snow, flooding low grass and carrying driftwood downstream. Eli built a small coop for chickens they'd found half-starved in an abandoned barn nearby. Clara planted seeds she'd saved from the market in Jackson, carrots, beans, a few herbs she said could cure anything but heartbreak. At night, they sat by the fire and spoke in low voices about small things. Where the birds migrated, what the stars might mean, how the air smelled different after rain. Some nights, they didn't talk at all. They didn't have to. But peace, Eli learned, wasn't the same as forgetting. Some evenings, he still woke sweating from dreams of the war, the smell of smoke and iron, the sound of men calling out to God as the world burned around them. On those nights, Clara would sit beside him, not speaking, just letting her presence quiet the ghosts. And sometimes, when the river was loud and the moon full, it was her turn to wake, her hands trembling, her breath sharp with remembered fear. Then Eli would do the same, holding her close until her heartbeat slowed. They never spoke of Travis Cole again. Not his name, not the ferry, not the gun. It was as if he had been swallowed whole by the river, his cruelty washed downstream into oblivion. One morning, Clara found Eli standing on the bank, the carved bird in his hand. "What are you doing?" she asked. He looked out at the water. Letting it go, she watched as he knelt and placed the wooden bird onto the current. It rocked gently, then began to drift downstream, turning and spinning as the river carried it away. Clara stepped beside him. "You think it'll make it far?" Eli smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter, just needs to find its own way." For a long while they stood there, watching it grow smaller and smaller, until it was only a speck moving toward the horizon. The sound of the river filled the silence between them. A sound that wasn't mournful anymore, but alive. Clara slipped her arm through his. "You ever think of going back? To the army, to the towns, to all that?" He shook his head. "No, I reckon I've done my share of fighting." She nodded. "Then what now?" Eli thought for a long moment. "Build something. Maybe a home that doesn't feel borrowed. Maybe a life that doesn't start with loss." She smiled softly. "That sounds like something worth doing." He looked at her then. Really looked. The lines of her face softened by the light, the steadiness in her gaze that no storm could ever break. And he realized that somewhere between blood and silence, vengeance and forgiveness. They had already begun building that life. Weeks later, when the grass turned green and the air smelled of spring, Clara planted flowers along the porch, wild daisies and lupine, the kind that grew freely by the river. Eli carved another bird, smaller this time, and set it on the windowsill. They never said the word love. It was something quieter than that. Something written in the rhythm of shared days, the way they reached for each other without thinking, the way the river never stopped moving beside them. As the sun set one evening, painting the valley gold, Eli leaned against the post and watched Clara laughing as she hung laundry in the wind. The fabric snapped and shimmered in the light, and the sound reminded him of wings. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted. He felt whole, and somewhere far downstream, maybe caught in an eddy or washed against a distant shore, a small wooden bird still floated, a piece of his heart carved into something that could finally fly.